My parents sent me to summer camp every summer. They probably saw it as a summer babysitting job, but a parent should always make sure their babysitters are capable of fully protecting their children before sending them away. During a particular summer when I was 13 years old, though, I had a pretty awful experience. There were 5 bunk beds in the cabin, each set along the walls. This summer I was sleeping in the bottom bunk on the sidewall. Though I had fallen asleep rather quickly, I was woken up suddenly in the middle of the night and saw something I couldn't quite make out at first. Keep in mind I was very groggy, and the unbelievably humid air in the cabin didn't help me wake up any faster. It was very dark, but I could see what looked like the shadow of an adult figure standing across the room. It was at the bed, just parallel to my own. I couldn't make out who this was, but they were fairly tall. They could easily see up to the top bunk without any real effort. He was also doing something with his hand. I assumed he was nudging the person in the bed to check and see if he was awake. I thought it must have been one of the counselors and didn't think too much more about it. I turned around and adjusted the sheets off my feet and pretty quickly fell back asleep. The next day I was assigned to do some activities with a kid who had been sleeping in that bunk. His name was Alan. In the light of the day, my mind was much clearer, and I was having a lot of weird feelings about what I'd seen the night before. My first thought was that one of the camp counselors must have been doing something inappropriate with Alan. But if that were the case, Alan didn't seem to be acting like anything bad had happened. The following night, though, I made the same observation again. I once again woke up in the middle of the night and saw that same tall, dark figure standing next to Alan's bunk. I was worried that whatever the guy was doing to Alan, he might do it to everyone else too, and maybe even hurt Alan. I made it a point that I was going to ask Alan the following day about what this guy's deal was, and maybe see if we needed to talk to another counselor together. When morning came, I was the first one to get up. I immediately remembered seeing what was happening the previous night and ran to Alan's bed to wake him up and talk about it. When I got up, though, I looked over at Alan's bunk and saw it was now empty. I ran immediately to talk to my counselor. The counselor hadn't seen him and contacted camp security, but Alan was nowhere to be found. He was simply gone. The surrounding forest was searched in case he'd simply wandered out and gotten lost, but no one ever found him. Even now, many years later, I have no idea what happened to Alan. I've dealt with immeasurable amounts of guilt for not getting up that night to confront the man and see what was really happening. Obviously, whoever that guy was, he took Alan away. Maybe I would have been able to stop it if I'd gotten up and said something to the man. This happened in an abandoned summer camp in Fukushima, Japan. What's even weirder is that I didn't know it was abandoned when I initially set out for it. I had been looking for Takakanonuma Amusement Park, a really famous abandoned park in the area. I had never been to this amusement park before and didn't know anyone else who had been either. Because of this, I didn't really know exactly where it was. There was a bit of an urban legend, you see, that it was impossible to find. If you entered the coordinates on Google Earth, you would not find anything. I've since learned that that's because the park was simply demolished. I would take these excursions out into the hilly area around which the amusement park was said to have stood. I got particularly excited when I came across what looked like a bunch of abandoned old cabins. I thought I was on to the first signs of something. I was, however, disappointed when I realized it had nothing to do with the amusement park. It was simply an old abandoned summer camp out in the woods. Well, perhaps it would be exciting to see an abandoned camp as well. This sort of thing is definitely not common in Japan. Despite my initial disappointment, I decided to go and check out this new discovery, and it was pretty interesting. There were a good 15 buildings altogether, so not a particularly large area. There was what looked to be an office, a cafeteria, some cabins, and a few buildings that I couldn't quite discern the nature of. The camp itself must have been very old too, because the forest had grown over it quite thoroughly. Large trees had grown in the walkways and bushes, and very tall grass covered everything else. It was the sort of scenery you'd expect to see in a very scary post-apocalyptic movie. I went into one of the cabins, surprised to find that the floor was still fairly sturdy. There were several beds in there, and it smelled musty and moldy. I didn't want to stay inside for too long. Then, though, I saw a bit of movement out of the corner of my eye and stopped in place. There was a very, very skinny old man laying in one of the beds, looking directly at me. My gosh, he was so skinny. It looked like he hadn't eaten anything in months. His hair was long and unkempt, and his clothing was ratty and full of holes. It consisted of nothing more than a dirty and ripped-up pair of slacks and a nasty stained tank top. His eyes were wide open, bulging out of his head, and they looked extremely angry. The man began to make this strange noise, sort of an enraged, gurgling yell. He shot up from the bed, then stood still, screaming at me. It was so weird. It was like he didn't even need to breathe. He didn't come at me at first, but began to wildly look around the area. I didn't know what he was doing at first, but I soon figured out he seemed to be looking for a weapon or something. While he was doing so, he kept angrily screaming until he grabbed a large, rusty machete and picked it up. I turned tail and ran. I sprinted out of the cabin, out of the camp, and was all the way out before turning back and looking. The man was standing outside watching me, still screaming and holding that machete. Fortunately, the man was very weak and had no chance of being able to keep up with me. I kept on running until I was out of the woods and arrived back at my car. I lived the summer camp cliché when I was a child. A kid doesn't want to go to camp and whines and cries until his parents finally send him away. Once the kid gets there, he doesn't really enjoy it at first, but eventually he gets caught up in all the fun. Honestly, that's kind of exactly what happened to me. I think what really got me into enjoying it so much was the cabin I was staying in. There were 10 boys in it. We all had 2 bunks. At night we would play these little games, mostly truth or dare sorts. You get a bunch of 12 and 13-year-old boys in a cabin by themselves. And generally the last thing any of them wants to do was go to sleep. Us boys would, of course, ask each other naughty questions to which everyone else would always answer with a bunch of lies. We'd also dare each other to do dumb things like crawl across all the tops of the bunks without hitting the floor. This boy Pete had his turn and asked me if I wanted a truth question or to take a dare. I chose dare. He dared me to switch beds with him. I had a top bunk in the middle of the cabin, and he had the bottom bunk just off to the side. I figured he only dared me because he wanted to sleep on the top. I accepted his dare. When I took my things and climbed into his bed, I wondered why this kid had given up such a comfortable spot. I mentioned before, it was a really hot night. We were in summer camp cabins, so we didn't have AC or fans. The only way we could keep cool was by keeping the windows to the cabin open. The bed he'd traded me for was right next to one of those windows. I fell asleep, even though I can't even remember trying to. Suddenly, though, I felt something grab me in my dream. I recall being very confused at first. It was an uncomfortable enough feeling that it caused me to wake up immediately. My head was hurting, and I quickly realized that someone was grabbing me by the hair and trying to pull me out through the cabin window. I tried to look up to see who this was, but all I could make out was a large shadow of someone pulling my hair extremely hard. I started screaming and woke up the entire cabin. I screamed as loud as I could. This person was really tugging my hair, and my head was already out the window. He was trying to pull me out with him. The other kids in the cabin were wide awake now, and when they realized what was happening, they ran out to grab some of the counselors. The counselors didn't get there fast enough for me. The man managed to get me halfway out of the window as I continued to scream. Then I caught sight of his face. He was nasty looking, covered in boils and dirt, no teeth at all. He was scowling at me with his mouth clenched, like he was extremely angry. 2 of the counselors arrived and tackled the man like high school football players. I got free of his grip. They then proceeded to beat the ever-loving life out of the guy as I climbed back in through the window. The police were called, and they eventually took the extremely roughed-up man away. When the counselors and the police were talking to us about what happened, one of the counselors asked why I wasn't in my assigned bed. I explained to him the truth or dare game, and told him that Pete had asked me to switch beds that night. Pete, when asked why he did this, simply told the other counselors, "Well, I saw a scary man hiding in the trees. He was watching the cabin, and I didn't want to be in my bed right next to the window, so I traded beds with someone else." Pete, you're the worst.